Yes.
How did you come to the soft edge?
I want to capture that information is not something you can really hold in your hands.
Yeah.
And
Right. Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
Do you know Mark Perot? Yuri Mark Perot?
no.
He had written a really interesting. He had tried to define when we went into the information environment, trying to quantify that. Welcome very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program Dr. Paul Levinson. And Dr. Levinson is the author of a book that I want to show right at the outset. I've had a great pleasure in reading and want to recommend it, but it's called, let me hear it now. It's called The Soft Edge, and maybe you can help me out. It's a natural
History and Future of the Information Revolution.
Okay, let's see if people can get a look at the way it is in the book stands now. And Paul Levinson, Dr. Levinson, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Good to be here.
And I may say to Manhattan Neighborhood Network here in New York. I wonder, maybe we want to talk about the book, and it's about, all the aspects of the information environment and that information revolution that's going on. But maybe you could, if you could, share with us a little of your own background, maybe academic or personal background a little bit, just to give us an idea of who it is we're talking to here.
Sure.
And then we'll talk about the content of the book.
Well, I wear a few different hats.
Uh-huh.
One is I've been a professor at various universities since the late 1970s, teaching courses in mass communications, impact of technology on our lives. I'm currently a professor at Hofstra University in Hempstead, Long Island. In the mid-1980s, my wife and I started doing something related to that, but a little different. We created a company called Connected Education, through which we offer courses on the graduate level in cooperation with major universities, completely through personal computers and modems.
How long have you been
Since
doing?
1985.
That must be just about one of the first ever done that
It
way.
was.
That was way back in the early stages.
That's right. It was in the Pleistocene
Yes,
as far
the
as
Pleistocene, right.
cyberspace is concerned.
Uh-huh.
I'm also a science fiction writer. I've had about 20 short stories published in Analog magazine and other places, and several anthologies. And in addition to that, I'm sort of a self-educated philosopher. My PhD is really in media theory.
All right.
But I realized pretty early on you can't understand communications without looking at the past 1,000 or more years, actually 5,000 or more years of philosophic thinking about who we are and where we're going.
Interesting. You're self-taught in a certain sense. And
That's
in
right.
a certain sense, I think that's the stuff that really matters. If you can just keep that curiosity open, the world is so interesting, and there's so many sources of information now that it really is possible for people to become very real, in a serious way, pursuers of the most important questions confronting humanity on their own, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The common view of education is that someone sort of takes some sort of hypodermic needle and injects the information into your brain. Actually, I think what goes on is people are active learners. They reach out, they get the information that interests them, whether it's in books or now online through the internet, and that's ultimately, I think, a much more satisfying and effective way of learning.
Yeah, it is, and it's becoming easier and more available to us. Now, you say you teach media and communication. Where did you do your work and so forth? And maybe you could, how well established is that field? And what is that field?
It's the field of communication studies, media studies. I got my PhD at New York University.
Right, okay.
And I studied under Neil Postman. He
Oh,
was
yes.
my doctoral advisor. And I admire Neil's work tremendously, but our views on media differ drastically.
Yeah.
I'm much more of an optimist about media and communications than he is. And my standard line about Neil Postman is I think he's my worst failure for me as a teacher, because I wasn't able to
to imbue him with the same enthusiasm you have for it.
That's
He
right.
takes a pretty jaundiced view of some of the effects of television, particularly, I think.
That's right. And
Yeah.
computers also.
And computers also.
That's right. He seems to think that computers and television are very similar simply because they both operate through screens.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a world of difference.
Yeah, that's interesting to have that. And you were involved in it at that level. We were speaking before on camera that you had a personal relationship. You worked in a way with the dean of those who understand communication, Mr. Marshall McLuhan, right?
That's right.
Maybe you could share a little of that with us.
Well, I can tell you how it started, because it actually
fine.
had something to do with Neil Postman.
He was bigger than life. Mr.
Oh,
McLuhan.
absolutely.
Yeah.
One day I walked into Neil's office, and he was editing a journal called Etc. It was published by the International Society of General Semantics.
I remember it. Yeah, I know it, yeah.
And Neil was sort of going, oh, my God, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. And I said, well, what's the matter? And he sort of gave me a manuscript. And the first thing I noticed on the manuscript was by Marshall McLuhan. So I said, well, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
And Neil said, well, I can't really make heads or tails out of
What
this.
year are we talking about?
We're talking 1977.
Oh, he'd been around.
Yes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So, right, McLuhan, of course, was very well known.
Yeah.
And it must have been a good day for me, because I glanced at the manuscript, and I said, well, this makes a certain amount of sense. It was one of McLuhan's works on how media have various impacts, and new media obsolesce older media and retrieve things which have been previously obsolesced.
And were you a fan of his at that time?
Yes, I was, yeah.
And was Mr. Postman?
Yes, we were.
All right.
So I explained this to Neil, and he said, well, if you understand this so well, why don't you write me a little description of it?
Okay.
So I said, sure. I didn't hear anything more for a few months, and then one fine day I get a call from Neil and says, Marshall McLuhan is in New York, would like you to join him for lunch. I said, that's wonderful.
Great.
And so, by the way, I should tell you that I sent up to Marshall the introduction that you wrote for his essay, which we're going to publish in Etc., as just a little preface to explain what his work really is all about.
Right.
And I sent this up to Marshall to make sure it was okay. And at that moment, several things flashed before my eyes.
Guillotines?
Exactly. This is, I'll have a very short career as a communications theorist. But McLuhan, although he said, well, you misunderstood something of my work, just like that Woody Allen film. But he was very gracious, and we became very good friends.
Oh, very good. And you actually collaborated him in a way.
That's
some
right.
of the work that we were doing then, right?
That's right. And
that's after Fordham, right? Or
that's right. Fordham was the late 1960s.
Right.
And Marshall had hoped at Fordham University to actually teach there permanently, but it didn't work out well. He had a brain tumor and an operation, and so he went back up to Toronto. But the last years of his life up there were very good years. He did a lot of important work, which is only first now beginning to come out to the general public.
Yeah, it's beginning this marvelous biography that's out now.
That's right.
He was up before it with John Culkin, I guess, right?
That's right.
Paul Ryan was up there then, too, right?
Yes, that's right.
And so that was a fruitful time.
It was a very fruitful time, and John Culkin then went on to the New School for Social Research to start the MA Media Studies program there, and that's where I got my master's degree.
Okay.
So I was imbued with McLuhan even before the PhD level.
All right, very good. Well, that's a good thing to be imbued with.
Absolutely.
And this biography, I'd like to give, I don't have the author's name now, but the biography that McLuhan.
Gordon is his name.
That's it, that's it. Absolutely marvelous.
It is
a
marvelous.
Work of literature. It just captures the spirit of the context, the intellectual context and that sort of thing of the man very, very well,
That's right. McLuhan is easy to misunderstand.
Oh, easy.
Because his writing...
Spoken aphorisms.
That's right.
Probes.
That's right. And a lot of people are impatient. And a lot of people in the academic world are impatient. Some of McLuhan's most misunderstanding critics are people, professors at various universities, who they pick up a book like Understanding Media, and if they don't find instant enlightenment in it, they say, no, this doesn't make much sense.
Where are all the declarative sentences?
Exactly.
And he talked in metaphors. His mind worked in metaphors and so forth. And he was poetic, and he was an intellectual of the highest order,
Absolutely. And he was interested in making connections among ideas. He left the explaining and the elaboration to other people.
And he was a systems thinker. You think it's fair to say he was a we were speaking off camera a little bit before. Another person we both had mutual admiration for was R. Buckminster Fuller.
Yes.
Both of whom would have thought of themselves in a certain sense as comprehensivists.
Absolutely.
In terms of understanding knowledge.
Absolutely.
And it's a little rare in an age of specialization and reductionism and everything, but okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, no, McLuhan understood completely that if you add a drop of blue dye to water, you don't have blue dye plus water. You have a blue liquid that's something quite different from either of the components.
Right.
And so his whole concept of how media influence us in our society is that when you introduce them into society, when, for example, the world became literate, it wasn't just people who then became literate. They were new kinds of people. They saw the world through the alphabet, and they therein saw different things.
Yeah, he did say that was the organizing principle for Western civilization, the phonetic alphabet.
That's absolutely right.
And, and they wouldn't let the poets into the Republic, and there was a Homeric kind of age and that kind of thing. And he had these views of understanding the media and the effects of it. And he said, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us.
Absolutely.
Which is an important thing for us to understand.
It's a crucial concept. One of the things I talk about in the soft edge is how the Egyptian pharaoh, Akhenaten, promulgated a monotheistic religion, very much like the religions we now have, a single, all-powerful, omnipotent, but omnipresent, but invisible deity. And he was he himself, the pharaoh, was regarded almost as a god in his culture. But the religion failed. It disappeared within 3 generations after his death. In contrast, the ancient Hebrews, with the alphabet as their scepter, basically created a similar religion, which became the world's most popular religion.
And here we have Western civilization.
That's right. And of course, I think the problem with Akhenaten and the promulgation of his religion is how can you possibly represent something which is all-powerful, all-present, but invisible with a pictographic writing? That's right. It's almost a non sequitur. You can't draw a picture of that which is invisible.
Yes.
But the alphabet, precisely because it has no connection to the things it represents, is extremely powerful and can bring us into all kinds of abstract realms and give us a very easy way of communicating about that.
And he also understood he also understood that the phonetic alphabet, he used to say it was a metaphor for the organization of Western civilization in a certain sense, and of linear thinking itself, or even onto the ideas of what we might think of as, or some people might think of as rationality itself, which was an interesting observation. A lot of people sort of lost track of. But
it is interesting. I actually wrote a piece called McLuhan and Rationality about 15 years ago, which I somewhat disagreed with McLuhan about that. I think the alphabet encourages rationality, but I see rationality as being almost a biological capacity of the human intellect. In Kantian terms, it's one of these innate modes we have for organizing our thinking. And the alphabet allows us to express our rationality. But it's not as if pre-literate people, or for that matter, what some modern theorists cynically refer to as post-literate people, are irrational. And that's one of the
I know. I think that's
That's right. And that's what I think one of the things that Postman and I disagree on, Neil Postman and I. Neil Postman thinks television somehow scrambles our rationality. I think that we're much too rational for that to happen.
Also the idea that things have to be done linearly in order for there to be, for it to be legitimate. And the established way of doing things, much less academically and so forth, does have a tremendous commitment to linear thinking and to specialization as a way of trying to get at understanding.
That's right.
Rather than an all at onceness. There was one description where Michener, who could write about Hawaii, and he would stand on the mountaintop, and it would take 8 pages to describe. The wind is on your face, and Mr. McLuhan used to talk about body percept a great deal. But the wave is coming in, the sun is here, and the bird is cawing, and it takes 8 pages to describe what, if you were standing there, would happen all multisensuously, all at once in a moment. And it was this all-at-once quality of that kind of a world, which is like the world through which we walk as we go about.
Exactly right. Well, if you were to make a mapping of genetic code, we just stretch out.
We're doing it now.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
And if you think about the fact that genetic code, when it expresses itself, when it's in operation, when it's in life, rather than being mapped out, is just all in one place, and it makes us, people, organisms, whatever, do all these things, results in all the colors, all the actions, and so on of the living world. But it's a very different thing to sort of stretch it out and sequence it, which is what the word literally is. It puts it in sequence. And so I think the alphabet, in a sense, operates like a genetic code. It sequences the world into a series of...
Do you think that... okay, sorry.
Well, and in a way, the Internet is like that, too, at its basis. The binary code is a form of sequencing.
It is there. But, I mean, I'm wondering whether it's a putting a grid upon reality in a certain sense, that now we're coming into an age of parallel processing. We're coming into an age of highly advanced computer capabilities and robotization and other kinds of processes now that might be introducing us into a new kind of environment than that out of which we have come only most recently in terms of the evolution of 200,000 years of human experience. We're going through some very, very rapid changes now in terms of these technologically extended augmentation of our central nervous system, aren't we?
Absolutely. But what I see is really crucial in the process, which a lot of critics overlook, is that I call media evolution anthropotropic. Anthropo from human, tropic from towards, as in a plant has a tropism towards the sun. And what I'm trying to get at by that is I think that as communications media have evolved, they've by and large become increasingly more human and natural in the various modes that they operate through. Several examples. The telephone by and large has replaced the telegraph. We don't communicate in dots and dashes and so on. We communicate in voices. Television has changed from a small black and white medium into a big full color medium. Obviously that looks more like the real world. Holography is in the wings waiting to develop. Socrates criticized writing all those centuries ago when he said that you ask the written word a question and it gives you but one unvarying answer. The Socratic critique of writing in the Phaedrus. But now online through the internet on the web you can ask the written word a question and get more than one answer, unvarying answer, especially if its author is still alive and online as well.
That's interesting. So we may be closing quotes or coming back to Eden but with knowledge of what's going on.
That's right. It's a three-step process. We start out where all that we can communicate is what is in our physical presence. So we can communicate to the extent that we can see, hear, speak, and so on. We have full sensory presence, but it's a very limited situation. So we developed communications media to break out of those limitations. And actually Buckminster Fuller was really clear about that. He said, eyeglasses are extensions of eyesight just as eyes are extensions of the brain. So all these technologies are ways of breaking beyond our biological boundaries. But the early technology does this at the expense of a full sensory environment.
Or a multi-sensuous, resonating kind of relationship to the environment about us gets upset and influenced because you extend one of the capabilities in high definition and it throws you out of kilter in terms of your multi-sensuous resonating synergistic kind of relationship to the environment.
Exactly right. It upsets our sensory ratios. And McLuhan pretty much stopped there. But what I claim is that there is something in human beings that has a hunger for a recreation of these sensory ratios. We want our cake and eat it. We want to be able to communicate across vast distances instantly, across time. But we want in that communication all the elements of human communication, the elements of the natural environment, which to us seem the most natural and appropriate way of communicating. So far from our communications environments remaking us into some kind of artificial new species, I see us making our communication environments into a greater extension of the human environment.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know how these ultimate philosophical questions might be one. You said you did a lot of philosophy and a personal kind of, the important kind of way of investigating these kind of things. We're at a time, and from what they tell us, we just had Monsieur Kaku in here the other day, and he was talking about we're living in a revolutionary time from a scientific perspective. We understand in the last 30 years biochemistry of the mind, brain. We understand DNA, Watson and Crick. We understand the quantum mechanics. We understand the atom. These things have all come against 200,000 years of evolution of Homo sapiens sapien. The understanding that we have now of what's going, of the reality, is coming almost to where it's not even hyperbolic anymore. It's almost L-shaped in terms of the understanding that we have, and that we may be at a time in terms of some sort of a, I don't know if the word is transcendence, or we might be at a time of some sort of a truly qualitative transformation in terms of our relationship to the environment and the cosmos about us in this time. As you and I talk, people may have said that throughout the millennia, but it really does have a technological basis for understanding why this is a time of a qualitative transformation. Maybe some people see liberation or some sort of a transformation in qualitative new terms.
Well, I think that's certainly possible. And it's a question, will we like that all? It's very exciting. And there are three levels, and I think he's a wonderful author. His book, Black Holes, and his more recent book,
Kaku, hyperspace.
Hyperspace, right. One thing, of course, is space travel itself. For the first time in human history, as far as we know, we can get off this planet. That's an extraordinary thing. A lot of people take it for granted. That's right. It's absolutely unprecedented to be walking out there on other worlds, other bodies. The second is genetic engineering, that for the first time we not only can change our environment, but we can change ourselves.
Yes.
You know, we've had, of course, in effect, artificial selection throughout history, breeding of dogs and plants and the kinds of, right, Luther Burbank did a lot of stuff.
Sure.
But through genetic engineering, it becomes much easier and much more powerful. And then the third is artificial intelligence, that now, for the first time, now I think we have a very long way to go in that third area, but the very fact that we can even think about developing something that would be truly intelligent, that we would call intelligent, from something outside of a living form is extraordinary. So,
an extension of our intellectual capability into creatures that, or into entities that can, in themselves, expert systems, they can learn from the environment and educate themselves as they progress. And the pace, Moore's law, and the pace of the communicating capability and power is so phenomenal now that it makes one begin to start trying to understand things in a comprehensive way, as Fuller and McLuhan did, that there's something going on, as Bobby Dylan said here.
That's right.
You know, and we're not sure we know what it is, but there's something major going on in a new and different kind of way, do you think? I mean, I sense this, but it's a little hard to get a hold of.
Well, it's hard because we're right in the middle of it, so it's easier to look at things after they've happened and understand I mean, one of the things I often think about is that we're still essentially, in a stylistic way, living in the 1960s. You know, the Beatles sold more records in the last few years than any other group.
Is that a fact?
That's
I didn't realize it, really.
That's right. They came out with their CDs, you know, their retrospective albums, 3 of them in the last 2 years, and those are the top-selling albums in 1996 and 97.
Didn't realize that.
Yeah. So imagine, I mean, the equivalent in 1966 and 67 would have been, what, Benny Goodman or the Paul Whiteman Orchestra or something?
69 was a good year.
Yeah. So I think that there is something extraordinary going on in the culture and our understanding. And for me, the key is not to worry so much about it. Yes, we have to try to understand it, but the best way of understanding something, and this is something that John Dewey, the American philosopher, articulated very clearly, is to do it, is to be part of it. So again, that's why the internet is so important, because it's not just talking about it. Anyone can log on just about to the web and see for themselves what's going on, see how hypertext links together ideas, what kind of research can be done, what can't be done. There are things that you can't do in cyberspace. You know, you can't send a cup of coffee through the internet.
No.
But all these things are going on, and I think the prospects in the 21st century are brighter, really, than they ever were before. To some extent, at the end of the 19th century, there was a lot of optimism, and in the 20th century, because of the world wars and Hitler and a lot of the horrible things that happened, there was a certain disenchantment with science and rationality and technology. But those ultimately are our best connections to the cosmos at large. That's what makes us different from other organisms.
The science and technology, you think, right?
Yes.
There's got to be a role in there for poetry and art and these kind of things that aren't necessarily connected to the sciences, or in itself comprehensive. We'll get back to Mr. McLuhan or to Mr. Fuller, and I'm wondering, do we have, or do you feel you follow these things and so forth? Though they were 2 people at that time, or Teilhard de Chardin, perhaps, you know, but they were people who took a comprehensive measure of the evolution of consciousness.
That's right.
And do we have such visionaries now? We're talking in 1997, or do we want for that kind of vision that is beyond the parochial views of specialized or reductionist kind of views? Or I just wonder, how do you feel? I mean, I personally wish Mr. Fuller were still among us. You know, but,
so do I.
But I want for people that will take a comprehensive vision in terms of the broad literature abroad in the world.
Yes. Well, I agree with you completely. I think, though, that people like that were always in short supply.
Okay.
They don't come along too often, and when they do, society tends to beat them down, to misunderstand them. It's not easy. You know, again, McLuhan, he had that bright flair in the 1960s, but then, I heard stories even as early as like the mid-1970s of students, when they were doing their doctoral dissertations, being told by their advisors, take out the references to McLuhan. It's only going to be harder for you to get this through the committee if you cite McLuhan's work, which is totally absurd.
Yeah, right.
But I think that poetry is lurking in a lot of us. One of the most impressive people I've met is Story Musgrave. who actually was the astronaut who went up and fixed the Hubble telescope.
Okay, yeah.
And to listen to him talk about what the Earth looked like when he looked back at it was not really to hear a scientist talk, it was to hear a poet talk.
Yeah,
He would look at a lake and see a snowflake.
Yes.
He would see things in the swirls around Earth that were really astonishingly beautiful, that were breathtaking, even though he was off the Earth by virtue of a very cold technological series of devices.
Yeah.
So at the level of human consciousness, I think science and art and technology and poetry tend to merge.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Comprehensiveness is or Mr. Kaku was here the other day, and he said he thinks we're coming to the end of reductionism, that the new era that's emerging, that is coming from these, largely he sees it from a quantum physics perspective and so forth, but he said we're coming into an era of synergism.
Yes.
Synergy. You know, that it's a comprehensiveness is coming back into having some capability of having some place within the academy and so forth, rather than everything being tried to be, quantified and reduced down to, subparts and so forth. Right?
You need both.
So maybe there's room. Yeah,
that's right. You need both. And you don't want to go so far in the direction, sort of New Age kind of mysticism that ignores, the
reality.
That's right. So I think you need both. If you think about it, actually, again, McLuhan made the point that if you want to understand water, the fish is the last organism you should ask, because the fish can only see things under the water.
Right, or if you're swimming in the water, you've got to be outside the fish.
That's right.
Oh, that's a creative figure and ground kind of thing you used to deal with. You've got to be outside of the context of the thing. That's where the creative person is,
That's right.
And that the creative person isn't only a painter or a musician or something of that sort. It's also people that have a scientific understanding and technological understanding of the reality.
Exactly. The fish still understands something of the water, or you can only learn so much about a living organism by dissecting it after it's dead, because obviously if it's dead, you're missing the most essential part of the organism. So that part is missed by dissection.
Yeah.
But you can still learn a lot of things when you dissect it. You can see how the various cells connect to each other. So I think you need both. And I don't think these two things are so much opposed to each other.
C.P. Snow notwithstanding.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you completely that I think that at present, circa the end of the 20th century, in our present society and what passes for good scholarship in the academic world, there is probably a surfeit of analytical approaches and not enough of the Gestalt holographic approach.
Yeah, right, the holographic. That's interesting, holographic synergy like that. Yeah, well, it is possible to see that, and Fuller was really, he used to just say that he would accept, he accepted an a priori mysterious design to the structure of universal. I think he used the term universal mind. Yeah. He felt that there was an intelligence that cohered universe. He would even get on to things that remind me of Rupert Sheldrake a little in terms of seeing the universe as organic, much less Lovelock's Gaia, seeing the Earth as an organic entity and so forth. But he said there was an a priori, but he had granted a priori mystery to that, and it was made up of a series of synergistic resonances that interaccommodate systems, and that fits into physics now. There's nothing at the heart of the atom. It's only energy relationships of synergistic resonances, and it's interesting, he used to use the term synergy. I just read No More Secondhand God last night as it happened, picked it up, and he said that at the time when he would use the word synergy, and he would say to an audience of 8,000, 10,000 people, do you know the word synergy? Everybody knows energy, but do you know synergy? No one would know, And now every ad agency uses it, And Mr. Kaku says we're coming into an age of synergy. So it's the resonancy more than the sum of the system. If the system is consciousness on this or biological process on this planet, then you begin to get a large-scale pattern of our fitting into the cosmos. We started 200,000 years ago. There will be a consciousness that is transcendent to human consciousness at some point in the evolution of universal consciousness. Do you think we're at a time of birthing to a new way of relating to the cosmos now as we talk? Marshall McLuhan said, we'll go through the tribal dance, we'll go through it wide awake this time, this birth. Do you think we might be privileged to be living at that kind of a time now, or is that a stretch?
It's a stretch only because again, since we're in the process, we could still be at the very infancy of this. We don't know how long the birth is going to take. We don't know that it could take another 1,000,000 years, and we just might be at the first stages of it.
Well, I think I was trying to suggest that 9 months is up.
Yeah,
that's what I was trying to suggest now. And when the 9 months is up, you're in the womb, and
Yes.
and we're suffering a great deal of angst and problems in this society, and it's an Hieronymus Bosch painting,
Yes,
as Mr.
yes,
McLuhan used to
yes,
say,
absolutely.
that we're looking with all the anguish as we
That's
go
right.
from one to another.
Yes.
But it might be a transformation on a very large and perhaps liberating
Yes.
scale as we come into a new relationship, a liberated relationship to the cosmos.
Yes.
James Joyce
Yes.
said, "History is a nightmare from
Yes.
which we're attempting to awaken."
Yes.
It was one of James
That's
Mr.
right.
McLuhan's
His
favorite
favorite
lines.
quotes. That's
Do you think
right.
we may be awakening?
Well, I think insofar
I mean
as
now, in
yes,
this year,
yes.
1997, not 2,000 years or 200 years.
I think insofar as space travel is becoming more possible, we might be awakening. But I think it's a much longer process than
Okay,
that.
you do.
I mean, I do think
Pretty
that
exciting.
it's extremely exciting. I think that the most important contribution in some ways of physics in the last 30, 40 years, the anthropic principle by Wheeler and others, that basically you can't understand the non-living aspects of the universe without realizing that something about it gave rise to the living aspects of the
Interesting.
universe.
Okay.
So that, so that connection is extremely important. But to some extent, my view is that insofar as there is divinity, and I believe that there is,
You do.
yes, but I think it is, to use Kant's term, immanent in humans, meaning that we are the carriers of the cosmic code. Carl Sagan actually talked about this. Alan Wheeler does too. That we're the cosmos becoming aware of itself.
Yes, oh yeah.
So in that sense, I don't see things so much as human beings are entering a new stage vis-a-vis ourselves. I see it more as human beings are finally poised to take our rightful role in the cosmos at large as custodians of the cosmos.
That's interesting. That's a really the second law, says that all systems go to chaos. To the
That's
limits
right.
of the system, they go to chaos. And Bucky Fuller, God bless him, Dr. Fuller, used to say that the whole biological process on Earth had an anti-entropic or syntropic
That's right.
force of moving across
That's
entropy to bring increased conscious understanding of the process of which we're a part, but that it's within a nested hierarchy of resonating synergy, and that if we transcend, we will be introduced into another relationship to the cosmos, which is transcendent to that which we're in. So that it's a nested hierarchy of resonancy, and it's not objectively absolutist in any kind of sense, because it's going to introduce us into another level of mysterious resonance.
Yes.
Do you understand what
I
I'm
do
saying?
understand,
Yeah.
yes. Well, that could be. I would first of all say that I agree with Fuller completely about the anti-entropic import of life
biology.
and intelligence, right. And so someone like Norbert Wiener, as much as he was an optimist, he thought that entropy would ultimately overwhelm everything. That
Well, I guess in the end it will.
Well, no, I don't think it will.
Unless we go through wormholes
that's
or
right.
something,
Yes, I agree with both Fuller and Freeman Dyson for that matter, because the way I put it is, if you look at entropy as an infinite down escalator, so that no matter how fast or hard you run up it, you're still going down.
Right.
But I think that human intelligence might eventually figure out a way of getting to the very mechanism of that elevator and turning it backwards so it begins rolling upwards.
Oh, I see.
Rather than, we might be able to repeal the law of entropy.
Oh, well, then that's
so
a lot of, you're going to have trouble with a lot of people. But anyway,
yes.
yeah, right.
Well, because it's a question of what the ultimate relationship is between the laws of the universe and human technology. Technology always breaks laws, but you can argue it only breaks a given law to the extent that a larger law outside of it allows that to break. That's to some extent what Fuller's talking about these larger and larger.
Well, he would say synergy is a behavior system unpredicted by the sum of the parts. And we can't know.
That's right.
If we were in this condition of a new relationship, you can't know what it is when you leave the womb.
That's right.
So much as we want to try and project that, but you could get in a system's way, particularly with the idea with DNA. Isn't it a beautiful metaphor, the DNA, that an organism, every cell in the organism is in synchronous communication, and it relates to your information technology with all the other cells of that organism. It's an absolutely wondrous thing to be able to understand that, and perhaps be used as a metaphor back toward Lovelock's stuff of trying to see the whole of the human society in a systems way.
That's right.
Part of an overall organism where everybody's included.
That's right. Well, the key ingredient in all those systems is communication.
Yes, indeed.
We wouldn't be alive if the cells couldn't communicate.
That's what DNA is all about.
That's exactly right. It's a communications code.
Right.
And it's no coincidence that we're beginning to understand more of that and at the same time designing computer programs, because the two are very closely related.
They are indeed. They all
That's
come right out of one another. And again, I say to you, Dr. Levinson, this is happening now, and it's a temptation to put it off. I can't help thinking that there is something about this time in which we live that is bringing us into some sort of a possibility that history has not had available to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, the alphabet dramatically changed people.
Okay, let's go back to basics,
yeah,
Mr. McLuhan. Yes.
The printing press dramatically changed things.
Yeah.
Obviously, the technologies of the 19th century, and many of our current technologies, of course, were born in the 19th century. The telegraph, which allowed people for the first time to communicate instantly, regardless of where they were in the world. The photograph, which for the first time allowed people to capture an instant and very, very accurate record. I mean, it's extraordinary, free of the sin of subjectivity,
yes,
as
right,
Andre
right.
Bazin said.
Yeah.
And the telephone and motion pictures and all the media of the 20th century, each of those has changed us. But at the same time, we've remained recognizably human.
Yes.
So when we talk about the future, at least at present, I think that rationality obliges us to conclude that we're going to remain human, recognizably human as we are. I mean, I don't see that the future are really any different in kind than the past. I mean, that's one of the basic arguments of the soft edge.
Right.
That the communication revolution, the information revolution, has really been going on since we became human. In fact, probably the single most significant communications medium in human history, the one that made us human, was language itself. It's hard to imagine us being human without language. How could one even have had abstract thought without a capacity to communicate that? If all you can do is gesture and point to things, there's no way you can communicate this thought that you have of something which took place a few months ago, or you expect will take place in a few years, or exists someplace else. It's only when we have language that you can describe those unreal states that they become meaningful in human life and become a component of human evolution. So in spite of the enormous developments in communications, including what's going on now, I still think they pale in comparison to that initial development of language.
Well, remember that only emerged according to with the DNA, mitochondrial DNA, that we're all of a common ancestor. So that happened all of the time at that transformation. It happens. I mean, these transformations happen, and then it introduced us, as you said before, that we were able to extend our consciousness into the environment in a way that seems to be in a very, birds make nests, but we could extend our way into the environment that makes the environment other than, in an Eden-like sense, as given.
Exactly.
We could create it, as
That's right.
Gare de Chardin talked about.
That's right.
But we could do that, and now we've got the power to do this. Is becoming so monumental compared to the sweep of history. Again, against that line, that 200,000-year line would go like this. It wouldn't move, and now it's just going like that.
Yeah.
Now, it seems, to me.
Well, I think yes, I agree that it is. But the break was sharper between whatever it was that existed before us, chimp-like creatures or whatever, and human beings. And I think that literacy itself was probably just as profound, and the printing press is extremely important. One of the things I talk about in the soft edge, everything, it shattered the hegemony of the Roman Catholic Church, because people could read the Bible for themselves. It made the scientific revolution possible. Galileo may have recanted, but it didn't matter because his books didn't recant.
The truth didn't recant.
That's the truth, right. Because it was out there for people to read.
It was heliocentric.
That's right. And everything that we now associate with the modern world, to some extent, was helped by the printing press. So I think that media are profoundly revolutionary. Yes, I think there'll be enormous changes, that we're on the verge of now. But I guess we just don't know enough to know exactly.
No, I understand what you're saying, because we probably have not changed biologically that much from Cro-Magnon or whatever. It's mostly the changes. Now, it have been in the technology that we've been able to outer, as Mr. McLuhan would have said, into the. But those outerings of that technology have an effect on consciousness itself, doesn't it?
That's right, yes. And to the extent that we remake ourselves through our consciousness, there's no doubt that reading, the very process of reading makes us into different people. The literate person is not just a person who reads; it's a different kind of person.
It is indeed. Raymond Kurzweil now has taken his machine, or others have. He had that machine for the blind where you could read and then have the computer voice read it out. And now they go back as voice-activated database accessing that is making it possible. Do you think? I wonder. to bypass keyboarding in terms of database accessing? And is it possible to bypass, in a certain sense, certain aspects of the phonetic alphabet, and also the keyboarding that goes on in the keyboarding that goes on in the internet and so forth? Are we going to be able to get to streaming and other kinds of multi-sensuous involvements in an internet level? But more to the point, are we superseding perhaps keyboarding and alphanumeric, alphabetized ways of accessing information?
I think that if someone could have gone back with a time machine with these advanced computers to the world before the phonetic alphabet was invented, then yes, it's very possible that phonetic writing never would have been invented in the first place.
But it was.
But it was.
Yes.
And I think that all of us, even from a DNA point of view, we, our parents, our grandparents, etc., in one way or another now, for many, many generations, have been brought up in a world in which the written word, in which writing has played a crucial role. And we don't know enough yet now about the human genome to specify exactly what part might be responsible for this. But I wouldn't be at all surprised. And maybe this genetic code played a different purpose originally, because, you know, it's a very important part of evolution. Stephen Jay Gould refers to it as pre-adaptation, where aspects of our genetic code that were playing one role in an earlier history of our species actually can do some other things when new environments come into play.
Punctuated equilibrium.
That's right.
Yeah.
All of which is to say, I think that phonetic writing and maybe more generally reading and writing itself is hardwired into.
You think it's hardwired?
Yes, even on a Chomsky
Even though
level.
Homer would, they wouldn't let the poets in, and Homer said writing will create forgetfulness in the learner's mind.
That's right.
You know, you think it's hardwired genetically into the species?
Yes, I do. It wasn't in Socrates' time. But I think.
But it's become hardwired in the meantime. It's not still neurotransmitter ratios and susceptible to our, transformations and so forth. And maybe some of these young electronically oriented kids coming up are going to spell the end of that linear constructs and so forth that we associate with phonetic.
Parts of it are superficial.
And parallel processing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Parallel processing in computer technology is now beginning to come with icons and things rather than just linear presets.
Yes. Well, actually, I wrote a piece, and I talk about in the Soft Edge, called Icons in Garbage Cans.
Okay.
In which I talk about the fact that here's this wonderful, great innovation, like circa the mid-1980s.
Yeah.
If you want to delete a file or erase a file, you click on the file, and you drag it over to a corner of the screen where there's a garbage can, and you deposit, and you double-click, and it's erased.
Gone.
What a wonderful invention.
Hole.
But how about the word delete or erase?
Yeah.
That's, it seems to me, a much more effective thing, and that really gets to the point. The human intellect thrives on abstract writing and communications, and clearly for most of our history this has been verbal, and the kinds of work that Chomsky and his colleagues and successors have done, I think are right on target. I think that there is a genetic ability that human beings have to organize our representations of the world in what we would call grammatical structures, i.e. linguistic structures that make sense.
Can you have linguistic structures without a phonetic alphabet, without writing? I mean, and you can have communication and verbal communication. And certainly people sat around fires in pre-Homeric times and so forth and communicated a great deal. We got performance now that communicate a great deal,
Well, certainly was
without
possible.
Writing.
That's right. It was possible in the past, but I'm claiming, and I have no proof of this, but I throw it out as a hypothesis.
All right, why not?
To investigate. That I think that there's more to our written world than just a suit of clothes that we put on for the last 500 years.
Well, it'd be a couple of thousand.
A couple of thousand, but especially in the last
2,500.
That's right. But since the printing press, especially.
All right.
Literacy is an interesting thing. If you study the 20th century, you find that in the Soviet Union under Stalin, as barbaric as his reign was in many ways, and he killed 30 million people himself, but that he emphasized literacy, actually for his own selfish reasons. He recognized that it's a great way of propagandizing people. But wherever you go around the world, literacy is valued, and people who can read and write usually do better in their societies than people who can't.
Well, I understand that. Certainly. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So just again from the point of view of natural selection, it would be surprising after all this period of time if we who are alive now at the end of the 20th century and moving into the 21st century don't have some inherent propensities towards literacy.
Well, all right, that's an interesting thing. You have a strong commitment to that thing. I'm not so sure. I do,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
all right. It takes
But,
all kinds of, it takes many roads
that's
to
right.
get to
Here's another
Jerusalem.
point. I
Yeah.
came upon this article a few years ago, in fact, back in the 1970s, and I was delighted. It was a small article, classic, page 37 of the New York Times.
Yeah.
Everyone else probably missed it, but I saw it and cut it out.
Those are the kinds that are
Those
great,
the
aren't
best
they?
kind, that's right.
Right.
They're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
That there was a study in, I guess it was 1977, in Indiana,
Yeah.
a Midwestern place, just an arbitrarily selected
That's
town.
where I did my doctorate work,
all right,
Bloomington.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's probably in Bloomington,
Yeah,
close
right.
by. And they measured reading capabilities
Yeah.
of students, 1977, and they compared them with the way they had been in 1944. So 1944 was pre-television. Presumably that was a world in which literacy was not battered by the audiovisual media the way people were upset about it in the 70s and still are now.
Yeah.
And this study found that there was absolutely no difference in the literacy rates. And there's a lot of general feeling that literacy has declined and so on, but there are many countervailing pieces of evidence.
Well, for one, if McLuhan was right, and he said it's the basic organizing metaphor for Western civilization, he did say that was also the organizing metaphor for marching soldiers,
Yeah.
for assembly lines,
Yeah.
for a whole lot of other economic, political kinds of organizing, for people going, that kind of thing. He had a number of, views of what that effect was in terms of consciousness that wasn't necessarily creative and that
Right,
sort of thing.
right.
But I mean, the establishment and the established systems that we have and the systems that we've inherited from history certainly have a stake in the structure
Yes.
that literacy puts upon a society.
Yes.
So certainly the establishment has that. Now,
They do.
if you are swimming in that water, but if you're outside of the water, from a creative perspective, in a certain sense, figuring ground to that, they might be looking for something that is going to put us back
Yes.
to put us back to post-literate,
Yes.
or supersede
Right.
that and
That's
have
right.
that included within it, and we'll be relating in different kinds of ways to the environment about us, other than through the literate metaphor. Much of that might have to do with economic organization
Yes.
and economics of the information environment,
Yes.
which you write about.
That's right.
And
Well,
that's something really important that has to be understood. How are we going to deal with the soft edge of information technologies and so forth in economic terms, and how
Yes.
are we going to organize ourselves sociologically, politically, and ultimately economically these new technologies? Isn't that important?
is extremely important.
Yeah.
One of the things which I point out in the soft edge is that new technologies are not as expensive as we tend to think they are. One of the reasons that we think they're expensive is that when a computer company puts out a new computer, they charge as much money as they can for it, and they denigrate the earlier computer model and say, well, hey, here's this Pentium. You don't want to be stuck with a 486.
Yeah, right, sure.
But the fact is, a 486 operates at lightning speeds
Yeah.
compared to 386s, and
Oh, yeah.
386. The IBM computers even CPM computers from the early 1980s, compare those to a typewriter.
Yeah, and it's doubling every 18 months.
That's right.
Mr. Moore tells
That's
us.
right.
Yeah, right.
So I think that one of the things about the economics, and I think people are catching on to this, is that you don't need the newest equipment for everything. You want to go online, you want to be on the web, you can do fine with a 486 machine that's going to cost you just a few $100s.
Yeah.
So economically, it seeps out to the world at large, even though the leading edge of it is very, very expensive. And of course,
The prototypes.
That's
even
right.
are more so. Yeah, always. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
One of the things, by the way, about the web is there was talk that in the last couple of years it's becoming more audio-visual. That certainly happened, but the sine qua non of all web activities, the essential currency,
Still print.
is still print. It's
Yeah,
still
it's
the
partly
written word.
technology. Yeah, but we're going to start streaming.
They've
Aren't
been
we?
talking about
Aren't we
that
gonna
for a
stream?
couple
I
of
know, but aren't we?
Yeah.
With the
Yeah.
capabilities of this, we're going to get multimedia courses
Yes.
in your graduate courses.
Yes.
Are you going to have a multimedia components to your graduate courses that you offer on the internet?
No.
Or are you going to stick to the alphabet?
I'm a text
You can stick to,
chauvinist.
you're attached to
Sure.
Mr. McLuhan. You
Yes.
put everything down in books, didn't he? Too. Yeah, the
Well,
commitment to the book.
that's
Yes.
it. Well,
I must say I like books too.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
McLuhan once said to me, he was trying to understand, he said, how is it that someone like you, who's a logic boy,
Yes.
understands anything about my work? And then he said, oh, you used to be a musician in the
Yeah.
1960s. I was I was in a rock group. So he said, see, the only reason you understand anything about this is you have a musical sense.
What'd you play?
Piano.
Piano,
and
right.
guitar.
Keyboard, right?
That's right.
Bass or rhythm?
Rhythm.
All right, okay. I was just wondering. Yeah, anyway, yeah, the music is important. I like music as a metaphor, but the economics of that is interesting because one of the things that come out, Fuller, again, back from the metaphysical, he has his a priori mysterious design, the structure of universal mind, synergistic resonances, and I think he comes up to Sheldrake and sees us perhaps not traveling into outer space, but perhaps a resonancy of a maximally engaged humanity that will create a synergistic resonancy that will interaccommodate us to universe without moving physically into that, perhaps. But he did have this have-not kind of thing where he looked at the material world and he said throughout all of history we were in a situation of scarcity in terms of our ability and the system's way of providing life support, but that we got the steam engine. And we got the printing press, and then the First World War, and he had this graph that he had. I think it was on ideas and integrities. He had the graph, and he said we'd reach to 5%, maybe with the steam engine of the world could be seen as halves. And then he said we'd reach to 14% the First World War. We got up by, and he wrote in 1952, according to his reckoning, synergistically gathered and so forth, that we'd reached a point where 43% of the world's population were haves. Didn't have an absolute definition of ultimate greed and so forth. And then there were still more have-nots on a world system scale. And he said we had a 20-year period of imminent crisis to all human institutions. As we approached and crossed the 50% mark, we were gaining, that escalator metaphor of yours, we were gaining, and that people postulate that that's what 1969 was really all about, that humanity was crossing from a point where there had been always throughout all of history more have-nots, but that the technological capability we had transcended in a certain sense, in an ontologic sense. We had transcended scarcity as a reality in terms of the system that operates as interrelated spaceship Earth, and that all of our human institutions have been predicated on scarcity as a fundamental assumption in economics is. Do you think there's anything to be said for contemplating scholarship or intellectual leadership on this broad theme that perhaps we have, as a human society, superseded scarcity as an ontological reality?
Yes.
And what consequences that has in terms of trying to understand how we're going to organize things economically on this planet?
It's extremely important.
Yeah, and it's not discussed.
No, it's not discussed at all. I mean, and it's the key to understanding information to some extent, because
It is.
there's no doubt it's not that information is scarce. There's a lot of information. What we need are ways of better navigating the information.
Okay.
I mean, and that's why it's not information overload, it's information underload in terms of not enough navigational structures. So you walk into a library or a bookstore, you might feel a momentary twinge of being overwhelmed, but we have internalized, almost since childhood, the structures for dealing with those environments. We need equivalent structures for the information that's available now, and other resources as well. And I think that you're completely right. Up until recently, everything has been predicated on not enough of this, not enough of that. And the problems become very different when we realize there's a lot of stuff around. The question is how to equitably distribute it, how can people make the most of it. If you think about information, there's information available now for almost anything on any topic. It might not be as much information as someone needs depending upon what their level of work is. The question is how can we make the most of it? How can we use it to best effect? That's something that I think people need to be trained in better.
Yeah. It's even George Gilder, who is has a right-wing kind of perspective, political, economic, and so forth. But I think Fuller was talking about it in a very large sense, not only in terms of certain amounts of things, but as a systems understanding that there is enough of everything. I mean, automobiles, computers, cars, food, information, knowledge. We've transcended scarcity. And all of the zero-sum thinking, all of economics itself is the allocation of scarce resources. We haven't had a revolutionary kind of quantum new economics that can begin to allow us to realize what we're capable of doing, and it's an inherent schizophrenic situation in a certain sense, that we have a technological ability of providing life support for all of the people of this world that allows each of them to to participate like musicians in an orchestra, maximally engaged. We have a possibility of having that kind of liberated order, but we don't have economic and political systems that allow us to do what we're technologically capable of doing. It's ahead of where our dragging systems from that past are. Do you think that's a metaphor that's got something to say for the truth?
I agree with it partially. I agree
Okay.
with this insofar as, yes, I do think the situation has changed, but I think that we do have actually two very good systems, capitalism for economics, democracy politically, to deal with that new situation. Totalitarian governments, both ancient and modern, were always predicated on scarcity of resources. So here you are in the Soviet Union, the country was depleted of almost all its resources under the reign of the Tsar and its disastrous efforts in World War I. So you have the communists in power. To keep people from starving to death, they had to give up their freedom, they had to give up capitalism. Or People's Republic of China. It was even a logical thing given the state of the Chinese economy. You needed some kind of top-down organization, in spite of the prices that people paid in terms of their freedom and so on. But as you're correctly saying, once we recognize that information, that commodities, goods and services are not so scarce anymore. Not scarce. Then let the market, work things out unhindered by very flawed governmental rules.
But our systems of economic thinking are at a theoretical level. I mean, we're dealing in things. I mean, whether it's we're still basically dealing with Adam Smith, and it's 200 years old.
That's
there have been changes in physics. There have been changes in understanding. There hasn't been a revolution in thinking. And there should be. Who is the Albert Einstein of economics that can come up with a system that is going to allow us, who are falling all over ourselves trying to make the old ways work and don't allow us to take advantage of the new ways, and whether it is in a capitalist model, I mean, Schumpeter doesn't seem to. Some people think Schumpeter with creative, entrepreneurialism and so forth. Some people think Keynes had it. Some people think Marx had it. None of them had it.
I think
and
Hayek was about the closest.
Hayek, you thought. Oh, so you were like Hayek, so you're in that vein. Okay, thank you.
Yes, because I think Hayek recognized, again, that that's a fallible system, but that if you let the forces take care of themselves, and you don't constantly worry that all kinds of horrible things are going to happen without government control. And in fact, you realize that it's usually errant government planning, whether deliberate or just accidental, that causes some of the worst economic plannings and some of the worst economic problems. Hayek's contribution was to recognize all of those things, and if you get them out of the picture, that the system works pretty well. The problem is Adam Smith's ideas were never really tested to any great extent. They were to some extent in the 19th century, and actually that's one of the reasons why the 19th century was the age of progress, the age of expansion, the age of growth. In the 20th century, by and large, I think there's been too much top-heavy planning. Okay,
that's interesting. That's a very interesting thing, and it's looking at a very important question that ought to be put up in symposiums where this question can be brought and let Hayek come out. I like binary economics. I like Lewis Kelso. I think there should be a democratization of ownership of a capitalist system more than there is and so forth. But it's a question that ought to be more discussions on that level. And if there's somebody who's going to help lead us to those discussions in a way in terms of the work that you've done, it's you. And I thank you very much for all the work that you've done, particularly the self-educated philosophy that you've set yourself a course for and so forth. But let me show also at the end here now the soft edge. Give me the book.
A Natural History and Future of the Information Revolution.
All right. You've been hearing the perceptions of the author here, who again is Dr. Paul Levinson. Happy to bring you those perceptions. We're running out of time. We look forward to seeing you again next time on Conversations. But that's it for this particular segment. We've only just begun to scratch the surface, right? But that's it for now. We'll see you again next week. And Paul Levinson, thank you very, very much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Until next time. So we just got it in. It's really a good book. I've got Hayek at home in the shop. I'm going to bring him out tonight, Are you familiar with Louis Kelso?
I haven't read much of this time.
Binary. Maybe we could share, maybe we could exchange some information. I'd like to learn more about Hayek and how you see he fits in, because I've got it right on the shelf. I saw it last night. I'm going to pull it out and read it. You think he's really that? He's got this.
Yes.
Does he tie into Schumpeter?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're a Schumpeter in.
That's right.
Okay. Well, then I don't think that's going to do it.
Yeah.
There's going to be something beyond that, I think, that's needed. But That's just my own sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So take